okay, where did we get?
Right, so we're talking about these numbers, the 20% and the
Let's go back to talking about the nuns. And I'll start again. I can't remember exactly what it said, but
yes, I don't remember exactly where, but we were talking about the nuns and the way that most of them are the New Age crowd, or the spiritual but not religious. They believe in some
so
vague.
I think that you raise a very important point, which is that very often the figures for religious nuns, the 15%, the 20%, and then almost 30% of young people who identify as non-religious are sort of hailed as a victory for the atheist movement, as if these are all atheists. And that is not accurate looking at the data more carefully. It's very clear that these are people who don't like the label religion, but that they are quite happy to describe themselves as spiritual, as believing in God, many of them as spiritual but not religious, maybe some form of deists or what have you. And I think that one of the big challenges for the humanist movement in particular, and I'm speaking specifically about organizations that take on for themselves the name humanist and not necessarily the ones that are skeptics organizations or atheist organizations, the broader umbrella free thought movement, but the humanist organizations, is how to appeal to that large and growing demographic of people who are disaffected from religion, but who are not calling themselves atheists. And my belief is that if we're able to get them to come to meetings of humanists and they have a good time and they find that humanists share their political values and can provide them with some of the things that they might get out of a religion, then it doesn't matter to begin with that they might say they believe in God in some hazy way, and that over time they would likely lose that belief. And I think that that's supported by some of the sociological data that shows that when people are shopping for churches, it's kind of fascinating this finding, but what they do is they don't look for ones generally that share a certain denomination in which they grew up, but they look for ones that share their political beliefs, and then they change
Mm.
their denominational beliefs to match the church that has their political beliefs. And so I suspect that if you had a system of humanist communities around America that were open to progressive political values, pro-gay, pro-woman, pro-immigrant, full equality for everybody, politically progressive in general, and that happened to be non-religious in the sense of they affirmed a non-religious philosophy of life that welcomed everyone, that were politically engaged and engaged in service work, these people would join and like it, and then come to identify as humanists later, that we shouldn't make being a humanist a sort of requirement for entry to these communities. And actually, I think that's what we've seen to some degree at our Harvard community, as we've become more and more involved in the local area and done service work and reached out to beyond the Harvard bubble to people in the broader Boston area. I think we have found that we're reaching people who you wouldn't normally see at your normal skeptics in the pub brunch or the normal atheist meetup. A group of people who are looking for a community space where they can express their values and haven't found it in religion. And I think that challenge of capturing the nuns is going to be one of the major challenges for humanism in the 21st century. And if we don't do it, I guarantee that some entrepreneurial church evangelical Christian will find a way to bring them back to Christianity, and I bet it's already happening.
I think it is, actually. You see it all the time that people, there's this notion amongst evangelicals of having a personal relationship and that it's not about the church and that it's not about religion. That seems like it's very much an appeal to the spiritual but not religious crowd.
I think you're right, and I think that much of the emerging church movement is going to capture many of those people. And I think that's one of the fascinating characteristics about, and one of the things I sort of grudgingly respect about religious life in America, particularly Christian life, is how entrepreneurial it is, and how willing to shift its form it is if it doesn't see that things are working, particularly non-denominational evangelical Christianity in America. And I think that if we're going to have non-religious community settings, we're going to have to be just as entrepreneurial and intelligent about how we design them, how we market them, and things like that, as the best Christian communities, and I think we can learn a lot from them. So
Sure.
I'm quite happy to spend a Sunday in a megachurch and take notes. I've done it before. I've got huge notebooks filled with this stuff.
It sounds like the kind of community that you're talking about would greatly resemble the Unitarian communities that already exist, or the ethical culture communities. Would there be a way that these humanist communities would differ from those communities, or?
Yeah, I get that a lot in the sense that I sometimes get it in the form of, well, why don't you just go join the Unitarian community and stop bothering the atheists with it? And I think that's a very interesting question. So the difficulty for me, I have a couple of difficulties about Unitarian groups, even humanist ones. The first one is structurally they're too much like a traditional church for me, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't be much more innovative about how the meetings are organized. Like, I don't see why we couldn't have, for example, a 20-minute TED Talk followed by group discussions in small groups and highly interactive sessions. You know, I don't see why it had to be one person in the pulpit all the time doing all the talking. I think that's sort of potentially anti-democratic. It's not participatory in the way the 21st century has become radically participatory with social media. I just think we can be much more radical in our idea of what these community spaces can look like, organizationally speaking, than most Unitarian communities I know. And I just think that we can be more creative than they often are. The second thing, that's one of the great benefits of not having a religious tradition to have to uphold, is that we can build our own forms and reform them when they don't work for us. I think that's really exciting, and I like some of the experiments we're having into how we do our Sunday meetings at Harvard. It's kind of interesting to experiment with those structures. That's one reason. The second reason is more sort of values reason, which is that Unitarianism intriguingly does have sort of a commitment in its founding principles to observation and science. Mm-hmm. But I often find that it doesn't play out in the communities. And I mean this with the greatest respect to my Unitarian friends, but I actually don't want to go to a place that really kind of seeks to affirm whatever one believes spiritually. Whatever it is, you're welcome here, sort of thing. If it's faith healing, okay. If it's crystal malarkey, that's fine. I am a more staunch rationalist like that, and I'm very disturbed by some of the ways things like crystal healing are used to scam people, and I don't want to be in a community that's sort of agnostic about that. I want to be in a community that honestly says this stuff doesn't work. You know, get your kids vaccinated, and a voice of reason. One of our new pieces of our new mission statement in the humanist community at Harvard is that we're committed to being a voice of reason in society. And I think you could say a lot about wonderful, loving, affirming, open Unitarian communities. But I don't think Unitarian Universalist communities have consistently been a voice of reason in the public debate. I think they're too forgiving on certain things. And so that makes me want to say, I'm not a Unitarian, and I think that there's space for something different. Ethical culture is much closer to what I would like to see. And I have a huge amount of respect for some of the thriving ethical culture groups around America, and you could tell from that speech that you listened to, I think Felix Adler is kind of an idol of mine. He was someone who actually did what we're trying to do and went around America and built what we would call today basically humanist communities in these beautiful buildings, often in an extraordinarily entrepreneurial way. He saw an opening in the market and he filled it with a civic innovation which no one had really done before. He was a true visionary. And the Ethical Culture Society, while it was strong, achieved a huge amount for social change in America. It was a significant force, particularly in New York, where it started. And some of the institutions that owe something of a debt to ethical culture, like the ACLU and the NAACP, those are significant civil rights institutions in America.
Yeah. And
ethical culturalists had some part in getting those organizations off the ground. And that's really impressive, and very few humanist organizations can say that they had a role like that. So for me, ethical culture is sort of the
Yeah.
that basically non-religious communities, they call themselves religions, and I think that that's an interesting thing there, and how they understand the term religion is very rarefied. It's not, but they, sort of staunchly naturalistic, moral communities. The fact that ethical culture exists and was very successful for a while is a proof of concept, and I would love to see a revivified ethical culture in the 21st century. Frankly, I love the branding, just to be mercenary about it. What do humanists want if not a more ethical culture? It's a fantastic phrase to express what we would like to see in American life and across the world. And if ethical culture studies start exploding in cities across the United States, that would be the coolest thing for me. I would love to see that. So I can see it working absolutely hand in hand with ethical culture. We have ethical culture leaders writing for the Humanist Community Project. I don't see that there is a taper thin area between what we want to promote and what they want to promote. And so, I'm all for ethical culture. I'm a huge supporter. I think it's a wonderful concept, and with the right ideas and drive and passion, they could really make a huge push to reinvigorating ethical culture today.
You mentioned that ethical culture has sort of dwindled or almost disappeared. And what happened to these buildings that Adler went around setting up? Are most of them still ethical culture buildings, or did they turn into something else? Or
I think they've still got a lot of them. The Extraordinary building in New York is still there, and they still hold meetings in it. And when I'm actually going down there in August for a Humanist Institute meeting. The Humanist Institute is a sort of humanist leadership training program, and it's kind of amazing that they offer this thing, and they're hosted a couple times a year at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. And when I first visited that building, I have to say it was hugely inspiring to know that people who believe basically what humanists today believed were able to come together to build this amazing testament to their values, and filled it every week at one time with people who were committed to humanism and to making a change in the world based on humanist principles. I was just so inspired. I thought it was amazing. And a number of those buildings still exist across America, and even their legacy extends to Britain and other places, because I think it's the National Secular Society, but one of the British secular institutions in England are housed in what was the old ethical culture meeting place. And they still have events there. So they have a sort of amazing legacy of these buildings that they built to house these communities. And my hope is that they don't lose them. As you say, ethical culture is having a hard time now. In some places it's really thriving. In other places it's struggling to maintain the enthusiasm of the public and to get new members to join. And I think that's no different from many religious congregations, frankly. Many traditional religious congregations that are kind of struggling to redefine themselves over the past few decades, find what they're for. But I strongly believe that the idea of ethical culture is a good one. The idea of sort of not religious, moral social networks for people is a really good one on the sort of progressive end of the spectrum, and that I think with the right marketing, they could get tons of people to join. I just think that this crowd we're talking about, the religious nuns, one of the things that many of them are looking for is basically ethical culture. I think it's an amazing opportunity for them if they find a way to capture these people. I say capture, that sounds pretty terrible, but excite them, to inspire them to join.
Do you think the numbers are dwindling for the same reason they're dwindling with more traditional organized religion, or is it for a different reason?
Well, at first I'd say they're not dwindling everywhere. There are communities that are healthy and growing. I know there's some communities very healthy. I know that the Baltimore community is celebrating some growth. The new community seems to be vibrant, and when I visited it, those are the ones that I've spoken to members of most. I'm sure that there are other ones. I think the challenge is
Sure.
And we're not oblivious to this. I mean, we can see, and some of that is due to our inability to explain it very well, and some of it is due to, people's preconceived ideas of what we want to do and what we're trying to do, and hopefully when we clear those up, people understand a bit better of what we are and what we aren't trying to do. But it is a difficult idea to articulate, because what we really don't want to say is sort of atheist church. That kind of, people get the idea that it's authoritarian in the same way churches are sometimes, and it's kind of old and musty in the same way churches are sometimes, but it just happens not to have a God. But that's not that. What I see is something a lot more exciting than that, actually. It's a creative, reflective form of social and civic organization that performs some of the same functions as a church, but is quite radically different in many ways. And to be honest, if people come to our Sunday meetings at the humanist community at Harvard, what they would experience is very little like what they would experience at most churches. I mean, sure, we meet on Sundays, we have often a talk by someone, but it's much more casual. Like, there's time for questions. We are extremely stringent about the fact that the presentations are short and that people discuss the ideas, because we don't think we've got all the answers. The point is to spur discussion. We try to rotate speaking, so we don't have. I think sometimes people get the idea that Greg Epstein is sort of standing at the front of the podium every week. They hardly ever do our staff talk at these things. So we invite people in who are scientists, who are philosophers, authors, musicians, who we think have an interesting perspective, and then we spark discussion around it. And so what we have in mind is something that's really quite different to a church. Conveying what that idea is to people is actually quite difficult. And I think that where groups get into trouble is when they don't find effective ways of conveying what their idea is. And I think that one of the things I'm most proud of that the Humanist Community Project is doing is collecting valuable ideas about how to market humanist communities. There's brilliant posts about how to design billboards, how to talk to people about humanism and what it's about in a way that's successful and not heady and philosophical to the extent of being dull. Not to imply that heady and philosophical is necessarily dull, but you don't want to start off with very, very dense ideas with people. You want to have something grabby and compelling. So yeah, I think it's a challenge of articulating the idea. And then you asked about ethical culture. Ethical culture has an additional challenge, which is that it also wants to respect its tradition. And its tradition, they might need to think about changing some aspects of their tradition to appeal to a new generation. What works for Adler in his time, and some of the more successful ethical culture leaders in the post-Adler era, probably won't work now in terms of conveying the idea of ethical culture to people. And they need to think carefully about how they organize their space and how they talk about it to the people that they want to reach, and be conscious about their marketing and all the things that any sort of business or any sort of community has to do. And I think that that's quite difficult. I think it's a difficult time for organizations right now to reach out to a new group of people. But that's a challenge that's going to come up again and again, so we've got to get good at it.
Sure. Yeah, so changing gears a little bit. I know that you're also involved with gay rights activism.
Yeah.
What do you think is the relationship right now between the gay community and humanism?
Oh, wow. Firstly, I think that humanism should be extremely to the LGBTQ community. And if we're doing our job well, we should see these communities filled with LGBTQ people. I mean, I have a particularly strong feeling about this because I came out on a humanist service trip that Harvard ran. That was the first time I was able to accept that I'm gay, and come out to other people. So my humanism, my humanist activism, and my life as a gay man are very closely intertwined. So I feel kind of strongly about this idea, and I'm very proud that our community at Harvard is has a lot of gay, lesbian, I think also transgender people, but at our events regularly as members of our communities, and they feel welcome and affirmed and celebrated. Not just you are welcome to all, but we celebrate you for who you are. So I'm very proud of that. And I'm also proud of the fact that our community has repeatedly affirmed its full support of full equality for all gay people through numerous events, and we've given awards to queer people and to people who address queer issues, and done World AIDS Day events. So we're totally on board. But I mean, the sort of the broader question that you asked about, I think that humanism has for decades been in support of gay rights. One of the best parts of the Second Humanist Manifesto is the part on sexual morality, where it basically says no harm, no foul. Right? What people do in private is their own business, and indeed the different forms of sexual expression should be celebrated as long as they're not exploitative and as long as they're consensual, things like that. And to get that, I think it's 1971, 1974. In the 70s, basically what is the implication of that is full support for gay rights and for queer identities. That's huge. That was way ahead of many other national organizations. And so we have a long history of being affirming of queer people, and we need to trumpet that. I think we should be in every pride parade marching as atheists, humanists, free thinkers. And, it's obviously the case that the vast majority of prejudice against queer people in this country is religiously motivated.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the most clear case of religiously motivated bigotry right now. And if you look at the way that support for gay rights breaks down and correlates with religiosity, it's very, very clear that the more religious you are, the more anti-gay rights you'll tend to be, and vice versa. And so this is one of the clearest cases in which sort of atheist humanists have a moral high ground, and they should be very, very proud of that. I sometimes question the use of the sort of coming out terminology and framework to talk about being open about your atheism. I think for some people in some parts of the country that may be a reasonably accurate comparison. I mean, if you're Damon Fowler and you're experiencing extraordinary ostracism from your family community saying you're not religious, well, that's kind of a comparable situation to what some gay people and transgender people experience when they come out, and that's appalling. On the other hand, I think that sometimes the analogy is overplayed a bit. I mean, I'm not sure that atheism is the new gay. I find that a bit of a troubling idea, because I think that many people currently in the atheist movement are in positions of extraordinary privilege, and it just doesn't seem to me to the comparison doesn't seem to me to be quite apt in every single sense. So I'm cautious about that comparison. But in general, I think that there's a natural alliance there, and that the more atheist, free-thinking, skeptics, humanist groups can do for gay rights, the better for both movements it will be.
Right.
It will only improve the view of non-religious people, non-religiousness among the queer community, to see them fighting side by side with them, and it will and it will help the gay community too when they desperately need support. So, what
does the religious landscape in the queer community look like? I mean, I'd imagine you wouldn't find too many conservative Christians, but I mean, are there a lot of, because I haven't seen any of the statistics on religion in that community.
I haven't seen this. I haven't looked at the statistics myself in depth. I mean, I know from my personal experience that quite a lot of my gay friends, peers, colleagues are members of liberal religious congregations. I think that's one thing. That's a nice thing that you raised, because I think this is something to remember. I think sometimes people don't really understand how you can be sort of gay and religious, or transgender and religious, or lesbian and religious.
Right.
Because they say, well, why would you want to be a member of an institution that, sort of hates you? Why would you want to be part of a religion that really has spent decades kind of putting you down? And sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I feel kind of mad about it. I'm like, I just don't understand. How can you be a gay Catholic, for example? I just don't understand. Sometimes I feel that way. But I think that this is one of the reasons why I think the Humanist Community Project is so important. Religion is more than a set of beliefs and ideas and ethical principles. It is a social structure and a set of practices and a set of cultural expectations and food and things like that too. It's a very complex and wide-ranging social phenomenon. And very often I think that gay people want the community aspect. They want a place to come together with other people who support them in some way. Especially if you think about it, if they find it difficult to find that in their families. If you've been kicked out of your home, you can't speak to your parents, you have lost your friends from high school, whatever, a religious community that affirms you looks extremely attractive. Because you have people there who are a family of choice, who you can associate with and who are going to support you. And there aren't many secular options for that right now. Mm-hmm. If you are a non-religious gay person and you don't have a biological family you can rely on for needs of community and things like that, you maybe moved out of the community where you grew up in and gone to the West Coast, trekked to San Francisco or to LA or to Boston where you hear that civil rights are handed out on every corner. And you want to meet people and you want to interact with people and you want a community, well, churches offer that, and they offer it for free, and they offer it with a lot of other social benefits, often within a beautiful setting, with wonderful music, and lots of cute guys to meet. Goodness, I mean, so many cute guys when we go to church, it's crazy. And that's attractive. I mean, I'm being a little flippant, but it is attractive to people who often find it difficult, or at least in the past have found it difficult to find communities which support them, to find particularly liberal religious communities. And so I don't find it that strange that a lot of gay people might want to join the church. And I have a friend who is a passionate gay rights advocate who had terrible experiences at the hands of conservative Christians when he was back down south, in Kansas where he grew up. And when he came to Boston, he joined tons of churches. He used to go to church service almost every day. I was like, why would you love the community? You love being around people who are saying to him, we love you, we want you to be here, we care about you. And to broaden the point out a bit, I think a lot of people want that. But I sometimes go to church congregations and I find it really affirming. Like, people say hello to you when you go in. They say, we're so glad you came. Tell me about yourself. And I would like that as part of my regular life, with people who are not work colleagues, who are not friends, just other people who come to the same space because they believe some of the same stuff that I do. And so if you see religion as basically a social technology of bringing people together, I think there's a lot of value there. I think that the LGBTQ community has often found a lot of value in that social technology. The secular world has not provided, and here's where I agree to some extent with Alain de Botton's maligned book, Religion for Atheists. I mean, I think basically, to put aside a lot of the things in his book that I don't agree with, I kind of agree with the central premise, which is that religion is a sort of social technology, and the secular world has not been very good at harnessing that social technology. I kind of agree with that idea, and I can see why queer folks would like to make use of that sort of social technology. And I think that one thing that we will see when we start building humanist communities around America is that a lot of queer people join them, because they're naturally, in my mind, an even better fit than the liberal religious community. So that's what I think. Again, I tend to speak in 15-minute answers. I apologize.
No, that's fine. It's, well, your voice is always nice to listen to.
What can I say? It's my secret weapon.
Well, you're an excellent public speaker, and I think a lot of people wonder how that came about.
Oh, wow. Well, that's very kind. I public speaking very seriously, and I really care about it, and it's one of the ways I'd like to make my living when I graduate with my doctorate, hopefully in this coming year or the year after that. I'm thinking about life after Harvard. You know, I turned 30 in January, so I'm thinking about becoming an adult and making a living outside the academy. And I'd love to do more public speaking, and I take it very seriously, so I appreciate what you said very much. How did it come about? Well, I've always been an actor and a singer, and I did tons of theatre when I was in high school. It's kind of a very generic, super gay answer. I did tons of theatre in high school, and I loved acting. I had places at drama school when I was a kid to study to become a professional actor. And I decided not to take that route, partly because I decided quite early on that I wanted to talk about the issues that I cared about, that I wanted to say my own words. And I was writing recently an application for a job, and I wrote about a time when I was at a career advisor after I graduated university, and we kind of spent an hour talking about all the things that I liked to do and the strengths I felt I had and my weaknesses too. And after all that, the career advisor leaned in and she said, "James, I've got the perfect job for you. You should be a priest." I laughed because even then I was quite a staunch atheist, and I would always get into arguments with my religious friends at university and high school and things. And I was like, that's crazy. That's never going to work out. But in a way, it was a great idea, because some of the things that a priest does, sort of be a public speaker who's a sort of on moral issues of the day, I really wanted to do that. And I was like, well, what is that? Is that a community organizer? Is that, an activist? Let's try and become those sorts of things. And obviously coming out of the closet and coming to terms with being gay and sort of doing that quite late in life in comparison to many people. I was 27, and that was a big deal, and it made me rethink about my activism and how dedicated I was to that, and put more time into that part of my life. And now I consider public speaking one of the things that is most important to me. I can make most of a difference through doing, and I spend an awful lot of time practicing. I mean, basically, I spend weeks preparing the talks and writing them and rewriting them and talking them, and I've just got obsessed with slide design. You watched the speech when I did it, I guess, at the Free Talk Festival in Madison. I've done it. I did it again in New Orleans. It was so much better then. So I work at them, and I was lucky enough to do a presentation on service at the Center for Inquiry's Leadership Conference, not this past year, but the year before. And that was how I got on their Speakers Bureau. And from that, I got asked to be on the American Humanist Association Speakers Bureau and the Secular Student Alliance Speakers Bureau. So I got on all three of them quite quickly after I started doing humanist talks. And basically kind of ballooned from there. I just went, I said I would go anywhere and talk about anything people wanted. And I got a lot of responses, and I started going around writing different talks and doing debates and things like that. And there's a really fun debate on abortion rights that people should take a look at. They can find it on YouTube. Just search for my name, an abortion debate, and it's a fiery debate. It's really, I don't think I did it perfectly, but I think I did a decent job, and it's a fun debate to watch as it gets heated. So I've been doing a lot of public speaking over the last year, a huge amount this summer, and I basically take it very seriously, and I work on it a lot, and I love to do it. It's the thing that I love the most to do. So if anyone's listening and they want to get in touch, I'm very happy to come out and talk about whatever. I want to write a talk about sex and sexuality. I haven't done that talk yet, so I'm kind of desperate to do that. So if there's a university out there that wants an atheist, gay, heathen to come out and talk about stuff, preferably someone really conservative, so we can get a protest going outside, that would be awesome.
That sounds like a fun debate to have, actually, between if we could get a debate between you and a really conservative person on that issue.
Yeah, I'd love that. I would absolutely love that. I think one of the things that I've become more committed to since coming out is not just gay rights, but the whole idea that the LGBTQ movement is a liberation movement. It's not really just a movement about legal rights. It's a movement that's attempting to help people rethink their own relationship with their sexuality and to help society broaden what's acceptable as sexual expression. And I think that that's part of the movement that in recent years has become a little bit sidelined with all the focus on rights. I totally understand the focus on rights is critically important, but we also want to change society. You know, there's a radical element to the LGBTQ movement. And one of the things that I feel most passionately about, since it's affected me so much, is that just the culture of shame around sex, particularly in the United States. I think it's even worse here than in Britain in certain ways. That there's a very strange dialogue around sex in America. I always think it's fascinating that you can have. I just found the whole wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl to be the most amazing schizophrenic social moment where, on the one hand, you've got cheerleaders jumping around for the titillation of straight guys in the audience, and at the same time, someone's breast coming out is like this national scandal. And I was like, how can you hold those two ideas in your head at the same time? It's just bizarre. And I think that the culture that has developed around sex and sexuality in America is not always so liberating, and it's not always so life-affirming. And I think our sexual identities are extremely important to our lives, and if we were only able to more openly talk about them without embarrassment, we would be much, much happier in this particular area of our life, which is why, for some of his miscalculated statements and flaws like everyone has, I still think Dan Savage, for example, is a huge hero because he's brought sex into the cultural conversation in an open and unapologetic way like no one else has been able to do. And I think that humanists can do a lot of good there too, because there's no reason that we have to be ashamed about our bodies and about our desires. So, that was a whole different talk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Dan Savage is doing something really interesting. And I think, I think his well, I thought the kerfuffle about his statement at the high school journalism conference was pretty absurd. The response to it.
I thought that was weird too, but I think that, I don't know, he has said things that I thought, oh my god, I can't believe you said that. And sometimes, I don't know, I don't want to give a review of like that to his whole career. I think that in general, I just mention him as an example because I think that what he is doing in the area of sex and sexuality is trying to push the sort of cultural and social change that humanists should be more interested in trying to push. And I think that is one of the great insights of the ethical culture movement, is right there in the name, is that cultural change is extremely important if you want to achieve political change. And the cultural change starts with people, with changing people and how they live their lives, to opening up more possibilities, and sometimes maybe even closing down some of them if they're not life-affirming, if they're hateful, if they're discriminatory. And that's why I think there is a role for humanist communities, because places where people can go regularly to explore, express, deepen their commitment to humanist values would change how people live their lives. It's changed how I've lived my life. And I think that would play a role in changing the broader culture towards a more humanist direction. And I think that would be hugely valuable.
Absolutely. You mentioned de Botton in there, and I don't know if you wanted to talk about him briefly or not.
Mentioned who? I missed.
De Botton.
Oh, Alain de Botton. Well, I guess. I mean, I saw that his book was really maligned by large segments of the atheist community, and I agree with some of the critiques. I agree with quite a lot of the critiques. I was intrigued that many people, I don't know, I'm aware that I'm in a minority on this issue, but I'm quite happy to be in a minority. So I think that some interesting things happened. I think that he gave talks about his book that didn't well represent the main arguments of the book, and he said a couple of things in those talks that were taken to sort of hit the buttons of the current, particularly the sort of new atheist community, that part of our movement. He sort of pushed their buttons in a particular way. So when he said, for example, that the question of whether God exists or not, whether religion is true or not, is like the most boring question. I read that, and I think he's trying to be provocative, he's trying to be funny, he's trying to move on to a different sort of question, and I'm like, I'm okay with him saying that. I kind of understand what he's trying to say. I'm going to interpret that generously, and I'm going to move on to see what his actual argument is. And I think a lot of people saw that as him sort of rejecting the importance of truth with a capital T, and having no respect for reason, and blah, blah, blah. And I just think that was rather an ungenerous reading. I just don't think that's what he meant. I think that if you had read the book, it was clear that's not what he meant. I think that he cares about truth and reason and all those things. I just don't think he really wanted to talk about them in that book. And I don't think that an author has to address every issue of importance to a topic in a book or an article or a talk. I think it's perfectly okay for them to say, I'm going to focus on this aspect of my topic, because this is what I care about, this is what I have something new to say about, and so for the moment, for this little book, and it is a tiny little book, I'm going to focus on this and not that. And so that's how I took it. And I think that sometimes I think our community is a little too quick to cast people out and say, this person is not a true member of the free thinking community because they said X, Y, and Z, when a more generous interpretation of X, Y, and Z could bring them into the fold in some ways. And even if you still have very serious disagreements with them, you would take their argument more seriously and think more deeply about it. And what I see Alan de Botton is saying in the book, which I also think is quite beautifully written, actually. I think it was a fun book to read, and I think it's important to stress that it's funny. I think it's intentionally mischievous and trying to kind of poke fun a little bit at religion and at non-religious people. I think it's quite a mischievous little book, and I quite appreciated that, because I can be quite mischievous sometimes. And I think what he was basically trying to say was there is a tendency to, when you reject religious belief, to reject everything about religion, and that there are aspects of religious organizations, communities, structures that might be quite valuable for people who are not religious. And if that's basically the basics of his argument, I totally agree with him. I just think he's absolutely right. I've talked a bit already about religion as a sort of social technology.
Sure.
And I think that is one way of looking at it. You can strip out the metaphysical content, and a lot of these non-denominational Christian churches do, by the way. A lot of them have very little actual Christian content left in them. It is a social technology that does certain things well, does certain things badly. And I think that a really clear-eyed, rationalist view of the phenomenon of religion will be able to look at it sort of modularly. So you take out the modules that you don't want. You say, that bit of it we don't need, that bit we don't need. This is performing a vital function, but it needs to be changed. That bit we can take wholesale and just use as a secular community. And I thought what was nice about the book was that de Botton went beyond, this is a dangerous thing to do, went beyond just criticizing secular society for what it's lacking, and started to propose specific things that we might take from religion. And some of his specific things are bonkers. Like, from my perspective, it's just like, what? Why would you choose that? Like, of all of the things you could have picked up on, why would you choose that? And they're kind of quirky and slightly ridiculous. And I'm like, well, that's a strange thing. But some of them, I think, are very wise. Like, I loved his his idea of what he called agape meals, where people sit down to have a communal meal together, which has quite a structured form of social interaction. So they're provided topics which they can talk about together, and encouraged in formal ways to meet people they haven't met before. And he thinks it sort of talks about opening a restaurant where the whole point is to engage with people who you don't know already, not just go in a little table with people you do know. And I think that's rather a charming idea. And I think that often people do express that they're atomized, they find it difficult to meet people, but although they maybe live in a city where they're surrounded by millions of people, they feel lonely. And that's an odd thing. And that's a thing can be especially true of non-religious people who don't have a religious community. Where do they go to meet new people? Not in a romantic sense, not in a business sense, but just in a social sense. Where do they go where it's socially acceptable to talk to individuals, where that's built into the structure of the activity? I mean, you'll notice when you go to churches that they'll always have time when they explicitly ask people to introduce themselves to each other. Like, that's a very simple piece of social technology. There's nothing inherently religious about it. Why not take it and use it in restaurants or in other spaces? I thought that some of his ideas were quite creative and charming, and some of them I thought were wacky and silly, and some of them I thought were just terrible. Like, I thought the idea of, he seemed to like confession booths quite a lot, and I'm a bit like, well, you know, I think if I had a strong criticism of the book, it would be that he has quite a dismal view of human beings. He seems to think they sort of are childish and need help all the time and need to be always in danger of succumbing to their most base qualities. And I have a more optimistic view of human beings, that in general, they can be relied upon. But I do think that we all need help to be the best that we can possibly be, and I'd rather put it in that way. One of the ideas from ethical culture that I love the most, and that I think of as an educator a lot, I've been a high school teacher, I studied education as an undergraduate, I'm studying it now, it's a constant thread of my professional and academic life, is the question of how you get the most out of people, how you help them achieve their full potential, live their life to the fullest. And one of the ideas from ethical culture that I think encapsulates it is that if you work to elicit the best in others, you will find the best in yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's this very beautiful, sort of communal idea that we find the best in ourselves when we work to better other people and find the best in them. And I think that if there's any central concept to my philosophy, and I mean that in a sort of small p sense, my philosophy of life, but also my big P sense, my academic philosophy, it's that truth. And I think that some of the ideas in de Botton's book speak to that and are really quite wise and sometimes delightfully unusual and funny. And I don't think it deserved quite the excoriating critique that it received from some quarters in our community. I can totally understand people who didn't like it, and I didn't like parts of it. But I think the people, if they have been put off reading it, let me say this, listening. If you were put off reading the book because of what you read about the book on atheist blogs, I would say take the time to read it. Like, it's very short, and then you'll at least be informed about the book and be able to speak about it from your own perspective. If you find the idea intriguing, read it, and then see what you think after that.
Sure.